Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one's going to be for K302 Rebirth. And yeah, this is a really good episode. I think it's kind of at that point where I think the plot had a little bit more structure, because obviously right now the focus is searching for the airbenders, and it feels like the entire book is fundamentally going to be about those kind of airbenders, and they're kind of introducing the villains into play. And I suppose the tricky thing with this book 3 overall is that, like, the airbender plot is like the next couple of episodes, then there's like a distraction away from it. Like we get a solo episode, episode 7, and it sort of comes back into things towards the end. And then along the way, it's like kind of the Red Lotus slot in, but like they keep the overall goal of the Red Lotus sort of like a secret until right at the end. And because it's not much of a reveal, it just kind of feels like the structure, to me, feels a little weak overall with the main plots. But early on here, it's kind of setting up really nicely, and it feels like it's going to be this very kind of important stuff that's happening. So let's just jump in here and go through what we have in this episode. We start with the Red Lotus scene, since they're kind of the most, I suppose, separate than everything else. So fundamentally what we get here is Zahir freeing Ghazan, and then Zahir and Ghazan freeing Ming Hua. And we get this idea that because the others are benders, they were all held in these very special prisons that are meant to be extreme and really deprive them of anything relating to the element that they can bend. So Ghazan is on this kind of wooden prison out at sea, so he doesn't have access to any metal or earth or anything that could possibly, an earthbender could possibly bend. And especially with us learning in this episode that he's a lava bender, it's even more kind of important that they keep him kind of isolated from it. Ming Hua is a very extreme case where her prison is like suspended basically over like a, more or less inactive volcano to like deprive moisture from the air and just keep water away from her at all costs, to the point where I suppose any water she's given to keep her alive, she has to actually just drink it, otherwise she's gonna die. And it's cool, like you get to see Zahir come in, take out all the guards, just give a couple of rocks, nothing huge, to Ghazan, and he just kind of goes to town on the guards as well. I think that the only problem here is just that Zahir, I think in nearly every fight scene he's involved in, just being as skilled as he is always a little bit of a, like, you never felt the real need to actually like explain why he's the way he is. The fight with Tenzin, I suppose, gives you an idea of like, okay, so he doesn't have full airbender, like martial arts, but it's close enough, and they present him as powerful enough that it feels like it needed more. I don't have too big of a problem with it, but it ends up kind of impacting the series, especially this season, because like we're sort of dealing with Red Lotus versus White Lotus, but you completely underpower the White Lotus in scenes like this, where Zahir is able to just take out like 6-7 guards at once. And then like it makes sense that Ghazan can do it because he is like a special bender and stuff like that. But because we've never really established that, oh, Zahir was actually able to do this even before he had airbending, it kind of feels weird that he's basically like a rookie airbender, but he can still do all this stuff. I don't want to make a huge point about it, it's just the lack of explanation about a lot of Red Lotus stuff is kind of frustrating. And then with Ghazan, again, it's just this situation where like we don't learn anything about him. Over like the entire book, he is almost a blank slate as a character. He's just this pretty big guy who's an earthbender, has lava bending, and is part of the Red Lotus. Like, that's it. Like, because we never get an individual explanation for like every character as to why they joined this group. And I think that's another problem here. They are all fundamentally part of an organization that is a kind of splinter off from the White Lotus, that disagrees with them and has these different kind of extreme views. Why does Ghazan believe in the Red Lotus ideals? Like, here they sort of make it, the few lines he does get, he's kind of like, he never wants to go back to prison, he likes his freedom. Are you hinting that he was imprisoned before this like incident where like he tried to kidnap Korra, and that's a big part of his character, or not, because it's very, very unclear about that. And then that said, the Red Lotus isn't just about freedom. Like, does he really agree with the whole like freeing Vaatu plot that they're really all about and so on? How invested is he outside of just that it seems like they're all friends to a degree? But the problem is just that they explain Zahir and Pali to a degree, but they don't explain the other two. And outside of, I think, one scene later on in the book where Bolin asks him a couple of questions and he like says two of them are true, that's the entirety of his character that you get. And that's very, very unfortunate, because there's so many little things to him that I think come across as interesting, that seem to have a story to them. That he has tattoos, a lot of tattoos. They're all kind of blue in a way. It feels like it's not just, here's a guy with a couple of tattoos, that seems like a significant thing to him, like it's part of like whatever culture he's from. So is he from a specific Earth Kingdom town where this means something? Does the fact that he's a lava bender mean anything? How did that affect him growing up? You know, was he a lava bender from a young age, or did it come sort of later on in around like Bolin's age, as we learn later on in this book? There's opportunities to, you know, give him stuff. It's not that just that, you know, oh, the type of character he was, there was no real option to expand out on him. There absolutely was, just his design, his skills, use those things, and then of course just characterize him, give him a character outside of just the skills that he has. And it's the exact same case with Ming Hua, where it's cool that she's held in like a volcano prison, and the two of them come in to save her, but she doesn't get many lines after this. It's the whole group basically is kind of defined by their fighting, defined by their abilities, and they kind of basically say Red Lotus as a way to kind of solve any sort of like characterization plot reasons, because like the only thing you really get from her is that like she's a little, I suppose, when she speaks, you know, she really kind of does speak her mind, as you can see here, where like she's saved by Zahir and Ghazan, is immediately kind of like insulting them, and you know, making comments like, you know, oh, I'm surprised you saved me before you saved your girlfriend and stuff like that. But that's it. Again, like with her design, no arms. Like, how did that affect her growing up? Did that have an impact on why she chose to join the Red Lotus? How did that affect her learning waterbending? Which water tribe is she from? Or potentially is she from Republic City as like a kind of waterbender type situation? How does the timing on that work? And that's just little questions based off just, she's a waterbender and she doesn't have arms. Then, like, going into that, like, how did she learn with no arms to kind of develop that technique? Because they more or less, because she doesn't use her legs like incredibly much when she bends, so they effectively are saying that she's like a psychic waterbender, not psychic bloodbender like the Yukon family basically, but that this is something that she has, where she can just kind of be at rest, not really moving anything, but maintain the fact that like the water that makes up her arms is just kind of bent in place like that, just by seemingly just concentrating on it. And that's what makes her skill unique, that Ming Hua isn't just a normal waterbender who happens to focus her waterbending on her arms. How does she do that? Because waterbending does require you to use your limbs basically to control it for the most part, outside of the fact that we know that, at least with waterbending, psychically doing it with just your mind is actually a thing. So that's cool. When did she discover that she had this ability? And it's one of those things where like Mike and Brian had to come out and say that she was born with no arms, because that was just a question that everyone had, where like when you do something like that, of course everyone's going to ask the question, was there some incident where this happened, or was she born with it? cover that in the show. Don't just have it be like an out-of-universe explanation from the creators, and use that to characterize her, because she gets nothing basically after this. And it's absolutely a case of like most of the group being kind of all style, no substance. They're completely defined by their bending abilities, and they use the fact that they're part of an organization to make up for the fact that they haven't really characterized any of the characters. Even Zahir, who you get a little bit more on, is still fundamentally just the Red Lotus guy. You're not really getting his side of things. Whereas at least with Unalaq, who's also part of the Red Lotus and is all for the Red Lotus ideals, you still get the idea that his fundamental thing is his spirituality, and then add into that like how he feels about his family, the manipulation of Korra and stuff like that, and there's a bit more substance to him than any of the Red Lotus characters. And it's always why like I take some issue when I see people say that like the Red Lotus are my favorite characters. I'm just like, is it just from a potential perspective because they all have cool powers, or is it because you actually think they're good characters? Which is, I think, the main thing that I really can't agree with, because I don't think there's anything to really latch onto at all with them, because they just, none of the key questions that are presented here are answered, and anything that is answered, it's always just told through dialogue, when Unalaq and Amon both got like backstory stuff to explain kind of what was happening with them. But of course they set up the fact that after this they are going to get the last member out, and the idea is that Zahir knows this is going to be the toughest one to get out, his girlfriend, and it's obviously Pali, who's a combustion bender, and especially like Zuko's reaction in the kind of final scene of the episode. You know that this is serious. This is the character they cannot allow to kind of escape from this prison. So the White Lotus are properly mobilizing to try and really, really stop them here. And it's a cool use of Zuko, who we know from like the Welcome to Republic City game, he isn't the Fire Lord at this point in time. This is sort of the reveal that he is part of the White Lotus in some kind of way, and him organizing things. The reveal that he has a dragon, I think, is one of those ones where, like, I wouldn't criticize the fact that they never revealed where he came from as, like, a specifically Book 3 criticism, but just as, like, a overall Korra criticism that they never felt the need to explain that. Similarly with the Sky Bison, but at least there's somewhat of an explanation for the Sky Bison, because Beginnings sort of helps to explain that right at the end. But here it's kind of like, we have the Ancient Sun Warrior artifact, the dragon egg. Is it that? When did it happen? How long has he had Druk? What's going on here? Because otherwise, if you're not thinking about that kind of more obscure kind of theory thing, and you weren't in the fandom when that was like a huge theory, the Purple Dragon theory, you wouldn't be thinking about that. So it's just like, okay, what we know about dragons is that they're basically extinct outside of Ran and Shaw. Where'd this one come from? This isn't either of those ones. Like, did they have other children? Was there like another egg and a dragon born, or what? Like, dragons are like interesting and I suppose important enough animals where it kind of feels like, tell us where this came from in some way, somewhere, tell us. But they never have, and again, it's not too big of a problem, but because you set up this dynamic where you've basically said dragons are extinct, saying that requires an explanation when you reintroduce them back. You explained why airbenders came back. You more or less explained why there are still lemurs and sky bison. Why not the dragons? Why? So I like the Zuko scene. I like the voice of kind of older Zuko, seeing him really react here and knowing what's going on here. The fact that he really kind of puts over how powerful the Red Lotus are, just like individually, like no bender can stop them. That's how powerful they are. As a full group, now that their leader has airbending, this is terrible. That they get across that this is a really, really, really dangerous group that no one is going to be able to stop, which I think is the one thing you can't really take away from them. Is that, you know, power-wise, with their skills, with the fight scenes, they really do get across how powerful they are. it's just they're sort of blank slatey as characters, which I think does take away from them. But that's that side of the plot. Let's get into the start of the quest to find the other airbenders, which starts off with a awkwardness between Korra and Mako primarily. Obviously, I'm going to be talking most of this book about how I don't really like this plot all that much, and here again, just actually seeing a scene of Mako trying to talk to Korra and just how awkwardly it's presented, it's just kind of like, why? Like, what are you actually trying to accomplish here? I appreciate that they have Korra be very kind of like open, acknowledging stuff that, like, I want you to be part of this because we're friends. I get things are a bit awkward, but like, I need you as part of the team. And he's just struggling with something, but like, what? And you're kind of like, is this going to lead somewhere? And it takes, of course, Bolin really kind of convincing him to join the group, and that makes sense because they set up the idea of like, we might find our family when we get to Bossing Say, because that's where we know where we're like originally from. I think that's pretty cool. It's just that I think that plot is so separate than this kind of personal thing with Korra and Asami. I don't think it's developed enough to really have any sort of like a payoff. And I think just the fact that they did this overall doesn't really have any net benefit or anything like that. Especially when they sort of, in a way, like the scene later on during the airbending show where Korra, like, as part of the show, is like airbending Mako. I really don't like the scene where she looks back at Asami and is laughing, and like they're basically both having fun at Mako's expense, because it really takes away, I think, the good from what Korra said to Mako in their earlier scene, where she shows a level of understanding of, like, she gets why Mako is sort of like awkward around them and is trying her best to kind of break free of that. But then there's this scene where she's like actively, in a way, kind of like using that against him, of just like the two of them sharing this joke at his expense, when I think that's the exact sort of stuff he was almost trying to like avoid when this was going on here. So I wasn't a fan of the writing on that, because I don't think it has any benefit to Mako, ever like trying to explain it away, that like, oh, the fact that they're joking around with him shows that they were trying to, like, make him more comfortable, when no, this is exactly what he was trying to avoid, at least in my opinion anyway. So not the biggest fan of that, and then I just don't think it has a good enough resolution to kind of justify like having him isolated so much from like two characters who have previously kind of been important to him. And like, it's not that when like we're past these issues, his relationship with them is better. We barely get any scenes with Mako and Asami after this. We barely get any scenes in the rest of the series with Korra and Mako, really. There's like, Korra and Mako have like a couple, but it's not enough. Like, compared to like the first two books, the number of Korra Mako scenes just is like completely down, and I don't really get why. But they all end up going, key moments being that Janora's coming with them, Bumi's coming with them, of course. Kaya's staying back with Pema to kind of look after the air temple, and Rohan. Iki and Milo are staying behind as well. I do like the scene where like Kaya convinces them that like, no, it's good that you're staying behind. You'll have to help out with any new airbender who comes to the island looking for help with their skills. That they're going to have to become teachers, because with Tenzin and Janora going off, they are the most experienced airbenders left basically after that, and it's an interesting dynamic to set up, definitely. But yeah, I suppose after that we pretty much get into the montage of going through the different Earth Kingdom towns to deal with the reports of airbenders. I don't want to go into too much depth on the individual conversations, but I was a little shocked to see that Tenzin and Korra especially, just went in and just expected people to leave everything behind and join up with them, become an air nomad, live at the temples. And especially that first guy, where they are so blunt about like, yeah, just leave your family behind, like your wife will understand. Like, really, Tenzin? Like, it's just kind of like, can you really not see the problem with what you're saying here, in that you are completely on that guy's side? You are completely against kind of what your hero characters are really saying here. Like, I get it, you're trying to bring back a culture that's like on the verge of extinction, that's only very, very slowly coming back through one family, and this could fix everything. I get they're excited and they kind of just feel that like, oh, we feel like we're going to do anything we can to make it happen. But it's because Tenzin, of course, has lived this in his entire life. This is his culture. He knows every aspect of it. The kids have grown up like that. Pema, as an Air Acolyte, as we'll learn, chose to live this way. But there was still a sense of having to adapt to this, that it is such a different thing. Because, especially where we are now in Korra time, most of the other cultures, like the Fire Nation, the Water Tribes, and the Earth Kingdom, and Republic City especially, it's for the most part this current era modern culture. Like, the Water Tribes aren't as isolated, like tribe-like as such anymore. There's obviously still some differences between the nations, obviously, there's always going to be. But there's a sense of it all being fairly modern, most places taking on some level of technological advancement. But it makes the air nomads really stand out as being the most different culture from everything else, where they're, not allowed to have possessions, that, part of being an air nomad, airbender, is that you are meant to have, like, a sky bison as a pet. You're kind of like, it's a forced thing. You're meant to be bald, you at some point will have to get these tattoos if you become a master, and you have to wear these specific clothes, and you can't eat meat. The way he presents it, the most people from other cultures kind of just see it as like, look at all these restrictions, look at all these things I can't do and I'm forced to do just by becoming part of this. And you can see immediately why so many people refuse it. These are things that Tenzin appreciates as like an aspect of his culture, but to everyone else they're just these like odd restrictions, and it makes the air nomads, like the culture, look very, very like, I don't want anything to do with this. But what makes it such an interesting culture is that it has all these kind of aspects to it, and it's just about them realizing that they have to get people to volunteer to this. You're not going to be able to force or, I think, convince a lot of people who have already kind of set up their lives like this. And so I think Korra's approach of kind of targeting someone a bit younger makes a little bit more sense. And as we sort of find out, for the most part, the people they end up getting on board are younger characters with only like one or two people who are maybe older. Like Boomy, of course, wants to become part of this. He makes that really clear immediately. He wants to have the whole airbender thing as well. But everyone else is kind of like, no, you have to make it clear what you're doing and just have them decide that they want this. You can't force it on them, because it is such a big life change, like telling someone you have to become a nomad now. And it's where their attempt probably should have been more along the lines of, you have this ability, like basically like Jinora, Korra, and Tenzin, they're like the only people right now who can really teach you to control your powers. Their approach should have been, give them very basic airbending training so that they leave and that person at the very least has a sense of how to control their bending, and so that it won't go out of control like it did with like Daw. That should be their like prime objective here with a lot of these characters, of just stopping their bending from being this kind of chaotic thing. And then if they like what they see, they want to learn more, that's maybe when you bring up the idea of like, if you're up for it, if your life situation allows you to, you can actually become an air nomad and really help to rebuild this culture. Go the full way with airbending training, become a master, and all of that stuff. It just speaks to like the over enthusiasm of Tenzin, blinding him to the fact that his culture compared to everything else is, a bit crazy in a way. And And similarly with Korra, even though she like as the Avatar like gets the airbending training, and has lived obviously on Air Temple Island, so she knows the kind of culture, but is not like inherently like stuck with that culture because she is the Avatar and is from the Water Tribe. So it's interesting that even she doesn't quite see the issue as well, and it takes obviously then Korra's approach of like being aggressive and that just getting her frustrated, which was a fun scene. And then yeah, I like how it's Boomy and Bolin together that basically come up with the solution that ends up kind of working out best, and that is give people an exciting reason to want to go with you. Show off where you could get to if you got the training, and just kind of pointing out that, look, if you join us, you're going to be trained by the airbending master in the world, Tenzin, Aang's son. You're going to be trained by the Avatar. Even like Tenzin's kid, look how young she is and look how amazing she is. She can fly, glide, all this sort of stuff. Even his brother, who's just got bending a few days ago, look how much control he has over it already. It was this. The show is such a well done scene, I think, for the most part, outside of like the issues that I have with the Korra and Asami laughing at Mako thing. Like, I don't mind his use for the most part in the play. It's even Korra maybe going a little bit too far with the attack. It's just, I think, the laughing with Asami at the expense, when like I think that was the whole thing you were trying to avoid, I think is the main problem I have with it. But just Mako kind of being the unenthusiastic like actor forced to play a criminal, and just play on that idea that most people are kind of afraid of firebenders because it tends to be just because of the 100-Year War, and then a lot of characters having like past issues with firebenders, like my parents were killed by firebenders and so on. Like you get where it sort of comes from. But it was a very, very kind of fun scene to really get people invested, and that's where we get the introduction of Kai, who I think is a really standout character in this book. It's a real highlight of like introducing a character, giving them some initial development, and then using them well over the course of this book. He's not in it like he's not like a main character this book, but they use him enough to where he is a very, very notable character coming out of this, and I think they do a really good job with him here, to the point where people were very frustrated that he wasn't really in book 4 that much outside of like that first episode. And I think that's a real sign that they got something really, really right here with Kai, because it gives kind of Bolin a character to sort of attach on to a little bit with Mako as well, in that like they have similar origins, and like Bolin takes a very sympathetic approach with Kai, whereas Mako's more skeptical with him, knowing, I suppose, that idea and where he's going. Mako knows the sort of behavior, but Bolin's much more sympathetic and like where we really go with it. And it's an interesting one because like they confirm he is an orphan, and I think they more or less say that like, okay, the reason he's an orphan probably isn't as tragic as like when the way he explains it, that like they were killed by outlaws. But it's still like just the fact that he is an orphan, it's like this kid kind of living on his own. But then the fact that they add in that like, no, he was adopted by like a rich family. He kind of had it made in a way, but he still tried to steal from them. That they're purposely adding flaws onto this character to give him a reason to grow, because what they more or less suggest here is that he's selfish. He only cares about himself, and is just using the airbender kind of show as a way to kind of get out of the way, go to Ba Sing Se and steal from those people, be the person he is here, just somewhere else. And it's this arc of him realizing people care about him, beginning to care about other people, and I think it's really well done for who ends up being a minor character and a young minor character, which oftentimes is kind of difficult to do with a character who's too young, but they give him a quite serious arc. But I think where the real positives for Kai are that like there's elements of Aang, I think, in him that kind of draw you towards the character in terms of just the kind of excitement when he's excited about something. There's a fun aspect to him. you could sort of tell he has that like spirit of an airbender. It's just he's a much more roguish kind of Aang, whereas like initially like early Aang in book 1, and I suppose Aang even prior to the series starting, is more of a kind of prankster type character in a way. You can sort of tell that that's kind of who he was when he was younger, before the Avatar sort of maybe smoothed things out a bit. Here is a much more like taking pranks too far, like thief kind of version of Aang, and I think that works as a kind of cool character trait, and especially like just immediately putting him into like this like potential little relationship dynamic with Jinora, and how this relationship between like 10-year-olds basically is done like so much better than some of the focused on relationships in this show, like that feature like Korra and Mako. There's so much like much better done. Just the setup of this, of like Jinora likes him, he seems to like her, and then how they morph it from just being this kind of like she's sort of attracted to him because he's like he is that kind of rogue, and he's sort of breaking the rules and she's kind of used to sticking with the rules, and they develop it more into like come episode 7 he's sort of like the catalyst for her really kind of standing up to her father about what's like being held back basically. And I think that works really well, and it's why when we hit book 4 everyone wanted to see a little bit more of Jinora and Kai's relationship, to really see where it is now that they're a little bit older. But I assume as the comics progress we'll get more on that, but it speaks to how well they did Kai, that people wanted more of him, wanted more of his relationship. And again, we have the Red Lotus, who are these really like 4 cool characters. How did you manage it that like Kai has more character development, there's more kind of intrigue to him just as a character in a way than the 4 main villains, and it just speaks to like the different levels of writing quality between specific characters. So that was cool. And then obviously the whole outlaw things, and then Korra kind of initially defending him from who end up being like the sheriff, the police officers. And it seems like they're just going to have to give up on Kai here. He's going to be taken away to jail. But I really like Korra's decision here, that she can't just let him go astray. She sort of senses something within him where they can kind of turn him back onto the right track. He is an airbender, he has potential. Because he's sort of like an orphan as well, he is sort of open to joining this. He's not committed to a specific culture. There is an option here, and in a way maybe the culture of the Air Nomads could help to sort of calm down these sort of more negative traits that he has. And then it's just like him going to jail at such a young age is just going to like ruin him as a person, and she saves him in a way by doing this. And obviously it doesn't get repaid for a couple of episodes until he has his arc in episode 3 and 4, but I like the scene that like Korra convinces Tenzin to like allow this, basically, because Tenzin's kind of like, do we really want our first kind of proper recruit to be a criminal? And Korra's like, I believe we can help him find the right track, and I really like that. And it's another instance of just this mature Korra post book 2, where she's gone through so much development, is so good, and really signifies how strong the development from book 2 was, and how enjoyable she is to kind of see on screen now that she's much more kind of confident about what she wants to do, and it's kind of really cool to see that. And I think that's most of the episode. It's just kind of continuing that we're heading to Ba Sing Se next. The Red Lotus are on their way to kind of get Pali out. You know, Zuko's heading in. There's some really cool stuff being set up. It's just when they commit to getting it, to doing it, does it have the resolution that's needed? And that's where some of it sort of goes astray. But overall, very, very solid episode. Like, it's a good start to book 3 with these episodes. It's obviously more of a factor of, I think, sort of like misuse of screen time with the Red Lotus that really kind of sours me towards them, but we'll get to those scenes. But yeah, that's been the review. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the episode. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.